Getting the engine aligned perfectly with the pump, and specifically the center line of the pump and the plane of the pump as it sits in the boat, is pretty critical. So I really take my time doing this and make sure it's absolutely right. So I got a bunch of different tools that I use. A little laser level. I put it on the pump and zero it out, and then put it on the engine to make sure that they're on the same plane this way. I also use the laser line to make sure that the center of the engine is lined up with the very center of the pump, and then also the plane of the engine this way, so we don't have any twisting or anything like that. So that's what I got going on here. 2 straight edges measured across. They're all squares, so happy with that. About ready to clamp and bolt this thing in final assembly. But this is the time consuming process. So these little laser levels, just got this thing off of Amazon. There's a bazillion of them out there, but they work pretty good for things like this, especially the beam that they shoot. So I had a straight edge across the back of the boat and straight edged it, or the beam of it. So I got right through the center of the pump, up through, made sure it's right through the center of the engine. So we're all good there. Time to drill some holes and get this engine in, and we're making some pretty good progress. All right, guys, well, the engine is in, everything is set, and just kind of making some progress here on some systems. I threw on this header just because I wanted to make sure that my steering cable was going to clear that. So this is the steering system, or the exact same route of the 146. I just wanted to make sure that we were going to clear the roll cage, the header, and threw on the whole steering arm, or the steering horn, if you will. It's a combo. Southern Jet does a combo with the steering and the reverse actuator all on one post. Threw in my bracing that I already had made, and you can see right here, these are just kind of thrown in here so I can show you. My steering cables are just a little bit short, this coming out of the 146 to here, so I'm going to have to rebuild those steering cables. So I ran into my trusty Ace hardware store, got some more cable and some ferrules to crimp those on. This is how I do them with a designated swager, crimper, whatever. So that's what I'm going to get going on this morning, and then really it's just going to start to assemble this thing. I'm going to throw the carburetor back on, get the throttle linkage hooked up, get the electrical all back in here, throw the headers, both the headers back on, start bolting some things in here. But this thing, like I said, it's pretty modular just because it was already all built from the 146, so this should go pretty quick. Gonna get back to work. Well, I just shot 15 minutes of video. However, there was 0 minutes video because I didn't actually hit the record button. So unfortunately, you missed the entire build of the steering cable. So I'm just gonna show you real quick how it turned out, how I did it, and whatnot. So here is my finished steering cable, just a loop over a pin. You want to make sure that these are round so it doesn't fray your cable. Swaged on. I'm pretty sure I got this little hand swager from a company called E-Rigging, if I remember right. So I also use these little stainless steel turnbuckles with locking nuts. They seem to work pretty good. There's fancier ones, but that is it. There's my my little pulley system up there to make the steering cables make the turn, and up here is, I had to cut the old steering cables off and swaged on some of these. Again, I go around the round part of there, make sure that your loop is around something nice and round so that those things don't get frayed at all. So the steering is done. That's it, minus the essentially the fine-tune adjustment of where the steering wheel is centered up. I'll talk about that. That's going to be days down the road, but for now the steering is done. So that is a biggie. That actually went very easy. So now I'm on to easier stuff, i.e. throwing on the carburetor, headers, all that kind of stuff. However, I'm going to start tackling the harder things for now, i.e. the fuel tank. Fuel tank needs to be cleaned up, but everything should go in. I may have to reroute some lines for that, but fuel tank goes in here. And then my electrical panel is going to go there with the starter and everything else. So I'm going to get working on those because those are a little bit more difficult. The stuff like the headers, the water, the cooling lines, that's all easy. So I'm going to get the hard stuff done first and move on with the easy stuff so it goes fast, and we'll get this thing out the door. So here we go. fuel tank all nice and cleaned up, but went to put it in the boat, and this weld right here was cracked, and the little bracket is about ready to come off. So, I don't know about you all, but welding something that has fuel or fuel vapors in it cannot be a good thing. So I'm gonna have to, what I do when I have to do this, I'll drain. There's a little bit of fuel in here, maybe half gallon. I don't want water going into the fuel filter, so I'm gonna have to take this thing off, drain it completely, put a cap on there, and completely fill this thing with water to get all the vapors up and out of that thing. Because it's not the actual fuel, it's the fuel vapors that explodes when you start to weld that stuff. I haven't blown myself up yet, but hey, today could be the first day. But we're gonna do this, get this fuel tank drained, and we'll try to get this thing re-welded on there. That's kind of just a crappy little weld. But we'll get it fixed up so that this thing can be secured in the boat. All right, we got the fuel tank all done in. While I had it apart, I went ahead and changed the weld and fuel filter in there. I'm running a 40 micron in there. Probably could go a little bit smaller, but 40 micron for this thing. I resealed the vent and just kind of cleaned that up. The fitting was a little bit loose, so I wanted to pull that apart. So the fuel tank is in, making some good progress. Every time I look at this, it reminds me of the day at Port Angeles when I set the engine down on that fitting right there and crushed the fuel line. It's all nice and good in here. I could probably do a short 90 left and get this thing to go more clean and directly. But what I found is sometimes just putting an extra loop in some of those lines, it takes the pressure off of it, and it takes the stress of a tight bend, and then you reduce the risk of crimping it. So just throwing a nice easy loop all the way back in, it gives you kind of more slack to work with also to get this fitting down on the fuel pump down in here. So that's kind of a tight fit and kind of a pain. You know, those AN fittings, the threads have to be just right. You don't ever want to cross thread those things. So I just put that extra loop to the right, and it makes it way, way easier, and you just have more line to work with. Anyway, so moving on, I'm going to go get the electrical panel, get that thing going in here, and keep going on Chris's boat. This is the extent of the electrical panel. It's very, very simple in this boat. We got a water temperature gauge, we got an oil pressure gauge, start button, the main battery switch. This is kills your ignition, and this was for the oil accumulator. It's not in there, it's in the house. Anyway, so we got an electric oil accumulator so we don't ever have a drive start. I carved this big old hole out of it for the manual reverse lever, but this boat has the electric reverse straight from Southern Jet. So I'm gonna go ahead and just replace that panel and do a quick one out of aluminum and make it honestly narrower. It doesn't need to be that wide, and I'll get going on that and get this thing in the boat. All right, guys, well, I'm kind of finding that there's not a lot of really cool stuff to show because I'm not really fabricating a whole lot, just kind of little brackets and stuff like that. So I think I'm gonna upload this video now, call it good, and I'll probably do one more video on this boat as we get closer to actually finishing it and testing it, because there's not a whole lot to do. We'll talk really quickly about what I did get done. Got the battery in with a little, just a couple bends over for the little hold down bracket. I made a hold down bracket over there for the oil accumulator, so that is in. The battery is everything but the hot wire. The starter is wired in with our jumper cable that comes off the trailer, so we got 2 lines going to the starter. And also got the fuel tank in with the filter change out. The brackets are done, and the little center console is in as well. So there's the 4 electrical things: temperature gauge, oil pressure gauge, and that is really about it. I also, let's see if I can do this. I got a little switch on the steering wheel for the reverse off of the Southern Jet system, so that's going to be pretty cool. But I'm going to wrap this thing up. It's not going to take long. We'll get this boat ready and out the door. You don't need to see me putting on the carburetor and all that kind of stuff. That's all pretty self-explanatory, but I'm going to upload this. We'll get this thing going. We got to get the 907 back in the shop so we can get to going on that and get it ready for that big 500 cubic inch billet small block. Woo! Let's go!